It's good to see everyone this morning. If you are part of the Sunday school or are attending Sunday school, you can be dismissed. We are grateful for our children and for those who give up their time to teach and to serve in that very important ministry for the next generation. The rest of you may be seated. We are going to do some good reading of the Word today, but it's going to come in just a second, and I don't want to keep you standing for that entire time. Been a crazy couple of days, hasn't it? The snow and the weather and the roads and the way people get in those things. You know, you walk into the store, you can't buy a loaf of bread. Can't find a clean road anywhere. Can't find a sane driver anywhere on the road. But thankfully, we come through that. Those are chaotic times. Those are things that cause stress, that cause us to worry and to have anxiety and to have fear. We're always going to have that chaos. If it's not that, it'd be something else. So I want to talk about this morning is trusting God when we have that chaos. I want to talk about how we can trust in God when it seems like the whole of our life is being turned completely upside down. Now, I don't know everyone's story in this room, but I know that because we live in a fallen world and we are broken by sin, that we all share hardships, we all share chaotic times, we all have forces that are acting against us and pressures in our life. And we're also in a time where the end times are playing out. So that's all going on in the backdrop of our life, right? And that's been where I've been reading lately. I've been reading on end time prophecy. I was fortunate enough 2 years ago, maybe, Pastor, to go through a study with you and your wife, with Brother Baxter, on end-time prophecy. And what was interesting was, even though some of the references were a little dated, it was all very relevant, and it was all very interesting. And while some of the details may not have been exactly as Brother Baxter was saying, all the big plot points were being covered. So that sort of engaged in me a desire to learn a little bit more about prophecy, because if you look at the Bible in two halves, with the Old and the New Testament, you have all the prophecy given in the Old Testament, right? And in the New, it's all that prophecy fulfilled. So prophecy is a big thing, and the fulfillment of those accurately and truthfully is a common theme throughout the Bible. So although the book of Revelation was one for me that was difficult to read, it was even more difficult to understand, and it was probably the most terrifying book for me personally to read, I devoted some time to that. So what I learned, though, is you can't just look at Revelation, because, again, so much of the Bible, it's your term, hand in glove. So I started looking for other places, because, again, I hate to keep trumpeting you here, but when you find truth in the Bible, it triangulates. It's easy to pinpoint and to find. So I began to read the prophets, the old prophets. And, you know, there's a significant portion of Daniel that leads into what Revelation can help us to understand. So I've been reading in Daniel in my personal readings, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, understanding the book of Daniel is important because it's key to understanding prophecy, especially in the book of Revelation. So in that spirit, I'm going to start with a verse from Revelation to set the table for what's going to happen here in Daniel chapter 1. And the first scripture is Revelation 2 and 10. And it says, "Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." So what he's saying here is, Church of Smyrna, don't be afraid for what you're about to suffer. Look, the devil is going to throw some things at you and put you in a prison, and it is going to test you, and you're going to have this affliction for 10 days, but I want you to be faithful to the point of death, and I will give you a crown of life. So I want you to keep that in mind as we go through today's message. Now, we're all familiar with the story of Daniel in so much as I'm sure we're very much in line with the Hebrew boys and the furnace. I'm not going to teach on that today. I want to go a little bit before that and talk about what happened in the beginning of that book. Now, Daniel was a teenager during the reign of King Jehoiakim. Now, Jehoiakim, he was an evil king. He was not one of the good ones. He was the third to last of the kings of Judah. The northern kingdom of Israel had been conquered by Assyria almost 100 years prior, and Assyria had now been conquered by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. The kingdom of Judah had popped up on Babylon's radar because Jehoiakim's father Josiah had attempted to stop Egypt from reinforcing Assyria against Babylon. A little local history there. Now, the reason is that Josiah felt that Assyria was the greater threat. So if he could let Babylon come in and take them out, then the kingdom of Judah would be better off. Long story short, that didn't work. Babylon eventually defeated both Assyria and Egypt. So that's what was happening from a historical perspective. But there was also a spiritual perspective to those events that we need to understand. Jeremiah and Habakkuk both identified Babylon as God's instrument to judge and to punish the nation of Judah for the horrific sin that they had begun to practice. And at the beginning of Daniel, Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, he ransacks Jerusalem for all of the treasure, and he also takes captive a lot of the royal family and the families of those who are rich, who are learned, who are powerful in the kingdom. It's what we would call the nobility of the time. And that's where we're going to start today. So we're going to go into the book of Daniel, chapter 1, verse 1 through 8. If you'll bear with me through this reading, this will set the table for us. Verse 1 says, "In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and of the king's seed and of the princes." So that's what we talked about. He went in, he took the treasure, he brought the kids out. But he wanted not just the street kids he was finding around. He wanted, verse 4, "children in whom was no blemish, but well favored, and skillful in all wisdom and cunning and knowledge and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat, and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king." So he brings them in, he wants to assimilate them. He wants to provide for these kids who are of an elevated status, because one of the things Babylon did was they went and they took these cultures in. They plucked their good fruits and tried to make them part of their society. Verse 6 says, "Now among these were the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, on whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names. For he gave unto Daniel the name of Belteshazzar, and to Hananiah of Shadrach, and to Mishael of Meshach, and to Azariah of Abednego." So for the first few moments of this message, I want you to put yourself in those 4 young men's shoes. So here you are, you're a teenager, maybe you're 15, maybe you're 16. Your whole life has been privileged. You've been pampered. You've had the best food. You've gone to the best places to study. You've had every want met. You're a part of the nobility. You're rich. You've had servants your whole life. You are used to being looked up to everywhere you go by everyone that you come in contact with. And you have a great life. You have the best clothes, you have the best food, you have the best friends, you have the best of everything that your nation could possibly provide you. But in comes Babylon, and in comes the chaos, and everything changes. And you go from the top of that heap to the very bottom. You go from the finest clothes to the rags of captives. You go from being respected to being enslaved. And they even take away your name. Now that was something that was of the utmost importance in Hebrew culture. They took his name. Now possibly the worst thing for these young men is seen in Isaiah's prophecy to Hezekiah. after Hezekiah stupidly showed envoys from Babylon just how rich and how well protected his kingdom was. In 2 Kings 20:18 it says, "And of thy sons that shall issue from thee, which thou shalt beget, shall they take away, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." So some of your descendants, your kids, your grandkids, your family, somewhere in the line of those who come from you, they're going to be taken away and they're going to become eunuchs in the kingdom of Babylon. Now you couple this with the fact that these boys were placed under the care of the chief eunuch, it's very possible that this was their fate. Now we can't be 100% sure of that. But none of these boys are ever referenced in the Bible to being married or to being fathers, not only in the Bible, but in other ancient writings at the time. So talk about losing your entire world. From worst to first, from order to chaos. Now consider all of that as you picture yourself as one of these young men. Now let me ask you something. If you're one of these boys, how do you feel about God at this point? Because let's be honest, people leave the church and they will forsake Jesus for way less than that in our time right now. You know, looking at our own light and our momentary afflictions and comparing it to what these men are going through, it really puts things into perspective. But you know what helped them? The only thing that likely helped them was that their formative years were under one of Judah's most righteous rulers, and that was Josiah. So that means they had good Torah. They had good religious education while he was alive. They built their houses on strong foundations. They knew truth and they lived it. And it's what saved them. Because that's what gives the Holy Ghost something to work with. And that's what will help to keep you faithful. And it kept them faithful in light of the chaos that they suddenly found thrust into their lives. So let's look a little bit further in 1 Daniel. We're going to go to chapter 1, 8 through 14. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. Verse 10, and the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king, who hath appointed your meat and your drink. For why should he see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall you make me endanger my head to the king. So he's thinking, hey, this is risky for me. If I don't have you eat and drink this stuff and you start to decline, you're the best, you're the brightest, you're the one the king wants in his court. That's going to be bad for me. 11. Then said Daniel to Melzar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, I beseech thee, 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Just give me food and vegetables. Just give me water and vegetables, and I'll be fine. I don't want the meat. I don't want the wine. And we'll see what happens. He says in 13, then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenance of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat, and as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So he said, hey, we'll just try it. And then you can compare me to them, and then you can decide what you want to do. 14, so he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. Now, making the Hebrews eat this food and drink this wine, that was very intentional on the part of Babylon. They wanted to strip away any vestige of their Jewish faith and take their culture from these men so they would only be faithful to their new nation. Now, that chief eunuch, he understood that. He had probably gone through that same process. He had probably already taken the nobility of other nations through this same process. And he knew that his life depended on these young men thriving because they were the best that Judah had to offer the king. But the problem was that Hebrews had very restrictive dietary laws. You know, much of what was being offered at the king's table, it wouldn't have been what we call kosher today, which means allowed under the Hebrew dietary law. Pork, certain birds, certain seafood, anything that had blood in it, it would not have been kosher to these young men. In addition, all this rich and luxury food, which would have included the wine at the king's table, would have first been offered up as a sacrifice to their pagan gods and blessed by their heathen priests, making it very unclean to an observant Hebrew. Now, in addition, that wine was most likely also used as a painkiller for these boys. Keep that in mind. Daniel was choosing to stay faithful to God and faithful to what he knew was truth, rather, all while experiencing extreme amounts of pain if he were indeed made a eunuch. Now, from a purely human standpoint, they had no reason not to just give in and just go along. They're no longer in their land. All their possessions are gone. Their rank in society is gone. Their ability to even have a family has most likely been taken. Again, from just a human perspective, their best option is to just do what they're told. Just follow along, toe the line, and just try to eke out what little ease and comfort you can find in this new life. That's the human thing to do. And if Satan was anywhere close to these boys, that's what he's whispering in their spirit right now. Just give up. Just give in. It'll be easier. You can fold just a little. Just eat the meat. We're all tempted in those ways. Now, this is their first of many tests which come later in the book of Daniel, but I want you to remember the scripture that we started with, Revelation 2 and 10. And I'll paraphrase it for you. It says, man, you're going to be tested. You're going to experience affliction. You're going to be put in a prison, but you need to be faithful to the point of death, and I will give you the crown of life. So despite the risk, despite the hardship and the pain, they chose to honor God and refuse the king's food. And they just asked for vegetables and water instead. How many of us could have done that? I can't say that I've faced anything like that level of loss and affliction in my own life. But like all of you, I'm in a season. And I can say that, first of all, I'm still in it. But for me, it probably started around 2019. In 2019, we lost Heather's father. My father-in-law, Ron, passed away unexpectedly, and he was a great man of God. Without he and his wife, I would not be here in front of you right now. I would not be saved in truth that I am now. So that was hard. 2020, we had COVID. The church we'd gone to for a decade decided to close the single largest Hope Center in Franklin Township, closes when people needed it most. And that rocked my faith. 2021, lost my mother-in-law. Heather's mother passed away unexpectedly. 2022, we're starting to get medical diagnoses on my children. Olivia and Andrew are starting to show troubles with their levels. They're displaying low vitamin, low energy, high plastic, toxicity, all these things I'd never even thought of before, with heavy metals and pollutants and toxins and gluten and glyphosates and all these other wonderful things I've had to learn about the last few years. And it drives up your fear when it's your children, and it drives up your grocery bill when they can't eat Little Debbie's and Fruit Loops anymore. 2023, Andrew gets diagnosed with lupus. Olivia gets diagnosed with lupus, and Andrew gets diagnosed with Crohn's. And as if it wasn't enough to have a significant event every year, from about 2021 on, I had significant issues with my house. And I don't mean just my four walls. My marriage was in trouble. Heather and I were not doing well. It's now part of my testimony, and I'm not ashamed to say we were at the edge. We had all those bad talks. We had all those words that start with D enter our mind and our psyche. And we started to look at what life might be like. We were in trouble. And then my roof wants to fall in. The siding's coming off my house. It's not wrapped. There's mold. Everything cost thousands and thousands of dollars. My life was on fire. And even with all that, none of that compares to what Daniel and those boys went through. I didn't lose my name. I didn't lose my heritage. But it does bring a conflict between being obedient to God and being faithful when you're in these difficult situations, when everything seems so hopeless. So I want you to go back again to Revelation 2:10. Just the last part of that. Be faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. That is a promise in God's word. And those promises that God makes, they always come true. Even if it's not on the timetable that I want them to. And faithfulness to Him will always, always, always bring favor into your life.
Yes, sir. Amen.
Right? So in my case, how was I going to stay faithful? How was I going to stay obedient? All these issues and conflicts are raging. And I'll tell you, it's because even though I had all that stuff, and I'm still in it, from 2019 to now, there's blessing there. Now, I don't get the gift of revelation in the moment to say, oh, my father-in-law's dead. Let me find the blessing today. I don't get that. I didn't get that. I didn't get that through anything as I was going through it. The only thing I knew is I had to keep my head down in this book and keep praying and asking and hoping and longing for God to help me and to open my eyes. And it's because we stayed faithful. It's because we didn't blame God that He opened my eyes through these things to new doors, to new roads to travel, to new perspectives, to new understandings. And when I go back through those events in my life again now, through this lens, here's what I get to see now. Now that the pain from that initial blast, now that I'm in the rebuild, I see that in 2019, I lost my father-in-law. And boy, did I lose something big in my life. But when I went to that man's funeral, you should have seen it. Hundreds and hundreds, if not 1,000 people turned up. He was a bus driver. He had children from the school pouring in to hear the stories of people say how much he touched their life and how much he meant to them. Or a girl come up and say, Ron gave me my first Bible. This man took a busload full of kids on an athletic field trip through the drive-thru at Dairy Queen and got them all an ice cream cone. Because for him, it wasn't just driving a bus. It was an extension of his ministry. And it was at his funeral that I delivered my very first eulogy. It was my very first time speaking from a pulpit. And I remember that I spent days agonizing over that, even up until the morning. And I got up there and I talked about the faithfulness of God and Ron's faithfulness and how it got me to Jesus and how clearly it had touched so many other people. And about a year later, his widow, my mother-in-law, came to me and she said, do you remember so-and-so from that funeral? And I said, well, I don't really. She said, well, he heard what you said and he saw the power of what happened in Ron's life and the power of the gospel that you talked about, and he gave his life to Jesus. He got baptized in truth, and now he's a mighty man of God, because that's the saving power of the gospel. So I lost Ron, but heaven gained another soul. And I don't know about any of you, but Ron will make that trade 100 times over. 2020, I had COVID. I didn't have COVID, but the world had COVID. And the church we were at closed, but it brought me here. I met this man. I learned what truth was. I had my eyes open to what the Bible really taught and who Jesus really was. And I can't wish for anything to be different than that. So COVID was awful and it was terrible and it impacted lives and people died. But it brought me to truth. And it brought me here and it changed my walk. 2021, Sharon passed away. But it was in that struggle that Heather reconnected with her siblings. It was in that trial that Heather reconnected with her sisters She reconnected with a brother. And through her passing, through the gift of her insurance, we were able to pay off a van. We were able to send our children to their very first year at private school when we didn't qualify for any financial aid because we had pulled them out midway through because we weren't going to do all the stuff that the public school wanted to do, and we had no idea how we were going to pay for it. And I'm not thankful that she died in any small stretch, but the Lord found a way to say, I think I can help you in this tragedy with something else. 2022, my children started having all their health problems. Still hard to find blessing in that, but it did change the way we eat. It changed the way we live. It changed the way that we think about food and what we put into our body, not just with food, but with chemicals and all these things. And trust me, there's a huge rabbit trail about what all of that is, but we were changed through those diagnoses to eat better, to be healthier, to be a better steward of these bodies that I have to have while I'm here. 2023, Olivia got lupus, and then later got a healing. I'll never forget the look on that doctor's face. I don't know what he was more shocked about, that he got the healing or that we sat there and we were like, yeah, we knew this was going to happen. Now, Andrew still has Crohn's, but I'm certain that that's on God's radar. But the blessing there was we caught it early enough to where it hasn't wrecked his life, and he's going to grow and thrive, and it's still very manageable. And as for the issues with my physical house, well, that is what it is. The Lord hadn't seen fit to stretch out his hand and just magically heal the lumber and things in my home, but he has absolutely improved my marriage. And I'm so thankful for that, because I could do nothing here or anywhere without having Heather behind me and with me and next to me and sometimes in front of me, men. So there are blessings in those trials, right? So let's go back to Daniel, because we can see it in Daniel's case. God sent his favor back on the faithful. In chapter 1, 15 and 16, it says, "And at the end of 10 days their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. Thus Melzar took away the portion of their meat and the wine that they should drink and gave them pulse." So get ready, because here comes the favor of God in 17 through 21. "As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. Now at the end of the days that the king had said he should bring them in, then the prince of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king communed with them. And among them all was found none like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even under the first year of King Cyrus." So you see, God's faithful. He was faithful to these 4 young men, and he gave them knowledge and he gave them understanding. Daniel was understanding visions and dreams. It's amazing that when the king talked to them, they found no equal. Now, the first chapter of Daniel, it brings to light an uncomfortable topic, and that's one of the hardest things to understand, and that's the concept of God testing us. You know, when I first started to read the Bible, one of the questions I always had regarding this truth that God will test us is, if God is omniscient, if God is all-knowing, then he shouldn't need to test us, since he already knows what we're going to do. But that is the wrong understanding of this truth. Our testing, it isn't to give God some glimpse inside of us or some information about us. And as I've matured in my faith, I've come to understand this at a deeper level. You know, when Olivia was a little girl, we lived on this little house in Summer Breeze Circle, and she got this bike, and I was trying to teach her how to ride it. And first time she got on, I was holding onto her on the bike, and I didn't expect her to stay upright, and she didn't. But as soon as I let her go, she fell. But I caught her before she hit the ground. put her back up on the bike. And I said, you got to pedal, child. You got to pedal. You got to keep on going. And you got to keep yourself centered on that bike. Second time, she managed to pedal once or twice, and then she fell over. But I caught her again. I put her back on the bike. Then I started to give her some of the good stuff. Hey, you got to work on your balance, and these little tips and pointers. Like, hey, don't use that front brake unless you're ready to do a flip over the front end of your handlebars. and I think that third try, she finally get to about 10 feet with me walking behind her before she fell over into the grass. Well, then I noticed something. She was staring at her feet. She was staring at the pedals instead of watching where she's going, instead of watching me. So the next time I got her up and I got her pedaling, I ran in front of her, and I told her to keep her eyes up, look at Dad, and then she was able to ride past me, past the house, all the way down to the end of the street, and she didn't fall until she tried to turn and come back. But here's the point. God's not putting us in uncomfortable situations because he gets any joy in watching us struggle or watching us fall. These times of testing, they're not for him. They're for us. God is the best father in existence. And he knows that in order for us to mature, that he has to let us experience the problem. He has to let us fall down a few times and then allow us to get back up on that bicycle of life and try again, having learned from our mistakes. And this will develop maturity, and just as important, it will develop perseverance. During a newspaper interview, Thomas Edison, he was asked how he found the desire to keep on trying to make the light bulb when you failed 1,000 times in 2 years. Thomas Edison said, well, good sir, I did not fail 1,000 times. I found 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb. Now, that's the key to understanding God's testing of us. It's to help us mature in him and trust in him to the point of developing the perseverance that we're going to need to handle whatever the future has for us. Stand with me. So this is what the first chapter of Daniel teaches us this morning. In Daniel's case, because of their faithfulness, Daniel and his friends are blessed by God with exceptional knowledge, with understanding, and with wisdom. And this favor from God positions them for influence with the Babylonian king, the ruler of the largest superpower in the world at the time. So in conclusion, I just want to remind you of what Paul wrote in Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. So I want to pray this morning as I leave that we would all have increased trust, increased faithfulness, that God would touch us and help us to mature in our faith and to persevere. Would you lift your hands right now and help me pray that this morning?